I well remember the first time that my husband Roy and I heard Rob Parsons and his wife Diane speak on marriage issues. We had sat down together one evening to watch their first video, Marriage Matters. I confess we weren't very sure what it was going to be like, but soon we were laughing, practically crying at times, and Roy was nudging me, saying, "See, we're not the only ones." Roy hated humbug, and I think what impressed him most was that what Rob and Diane shared came not just out of their expertise, but from their own lives. Here were two people sharing their successes and failures. Some time ago, Rob sent me the manuscript of his book, The 60-Minute Marriage. I agree with what Linda Lee Potter said about it, wise and witty, full of down-to-earth advice that works. I was thrilled when Rob told me that he was going to commit those principles to video. Now you can sit down with a cup of coffee, as Roy and I did all those years ago, and enjoy this brilliant communicator in your own home.
Why? I suppose if you fall in love with someone and you really care about them that much, then you're going to want to get married eventually.
47 years.
47 years, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Just prefer not to. That probably sounds really bad.
No, that's...
Oh,
I don't hold him with that at all, no.
It's probably just the best sign of commitment to someone.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to, ain't you? Everyone else does. Tradition, isn't it?
I mean, we're old-fashioned. We've been together 36 and a half years.
Good team.
I was just going to say the same, team.
Being there for each other when you need each other.
Of having someone else to care for, to be quite honest, frightens me a great deal.
But the best thing is you've got a stable base to come home. You go out, you go to work, you come home.
It creates a family unit, and I think it creates stability, especially for children growing up.
Well, I think we've answered all your questions, thank you.
Pretty good, yeah.
What is this all about?
Welcome to the 60-Minute Marriage. My name is Jonathan Booth and I'm the Director of Care for the Family, a charity which Rob Parsons founded, dedicated to strengthening marriages and family life. We work through providing counsel, answering hundreds of letters, organising seminars and producing resources like this video you're watching today. Our speaker is Rob Parsons. He's a qualified teacher and lawyer. He has spoken to thousands across the world, including Moscow, the whole of Europe, the USA, and Canada. He's a best-selling author and has written The 60-Minute Marriage. Please, will you join me in welcoming Rob Parsons?
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you today. Thank you for your welcome. You know, when I was 8 years old, my father took me to the circus. And I fell in love with so many of the things about that event, but most of all, I fell in love with the clowns. Oh, for lots of reasons. They could fall without being hurt. They had an incredible disregard of authority. But most of all, I loved them because they never cried. There was always that wonderful, smiling face. And I loved them like that until I was about 14 years old. I was home watching television. It was an old circus film. And by the wonders of modern technology, we were taken inside the caravan of the greatest clown who had ever lived. He was crying. His head was in his hands. And by his side was a mask with a smile on it. I find today that so many of us are condemned to wear that smile. To say everything's fine, but inside our hearts are breaking. I've come to believe one of the greatest killers of family life is isolation. The belief that we're the only people going through these tough times together. You know, Dan and I have been married for over a quarter of a century now, and during that time we have known moments where we've not felt in love, where everything seemed to scream out, let go, it's over. You know, the incredible thing is we have shared that with people. It's as if we don't depress people, you set them free. As others say, yeah, we've been there too. You are not the only people going through tough times with your children. You're not the only people going through difficulties in the whole area of finance or in your sexual relationship together. This is not just you. But we're such a mixed audience. There'll be those there tonight so much in love they resent being here. They could be holding hands in the moonlight somewhere. Other couples will be going through tough times. Man sitting next to a wife and in his heart the love has died, but he can tell nobody. Somebody on the very edge or in the middle of an affair. They believe that nobody knows. Perhaps people in the office are already beginning to sense what's going on. Single parent, mum or dad, those who've known the trauma of divorce, single people, quite a lot of single people come to this seminar. All kinds of people. And as I share my heart with you tonight, I promise I'll be as honest with you as I possibly can. Look, the last thing most of us need is someone to come over the horizon with 10 easy answers. That says, if you could be a husband like me, if you could have a marriage like ours, you'd do well. Most of us don't need that. I'll be as honest with you as I possibly can. I've had the privilege of talking about family issues in many different cultures in the world. I see thousands of letters that come in. The family has the ability to give incredible joy and unbelievable pain. And so in our short time together today, I've selected from many of the issues we could talk about, several that I believe can make or break relationships. In fact, from the many letters we receive, I have highlighted 4 phrases that come up time and time again. Phrase number 1, I see this in letters so often, I expected so much more from this marriage. You know, today, all kinds of people will be married. They'll all tell you they're in love, they'll look good, they'll be smiling, they'll have high expectations of their partner. They're convinced they've married the right person, but those expectations can be quickly broken. You know, today we have high expectations, don't we? David Borstein wrote a fascinating book about those expectations. He said this: today in life we expect anything and everything. We expect the contradictory and the impossible. We expect compact cars, which are spacious, luxurious cars, which are economical. We expect our 2-week holiday to be romantic, exotic, cheap, and effortless. We expect a faraway atmosphere if we go to a nearby place. We expect to eat and stay slim, to be constantly on the move and ever more neighborly. Never has a people expected so much more than the world can give. It's true of our children. There's a young mum in a supermarket. She has a brand new baby. He's about 6 weeks old. She's so proud of this child. She says to people who gaze down at him, I think he's already talking. I think that was a word then. And then suddenly, behind her, she hears an almighty noise. She turns, there's a 3-year-old toddler. He is spread-eagled on the supermarket floor. From somewhere, he's got a carton of yogurt. He has a carton of peanut butter in his other hand. He's dispensing these around the aisle. His poor mother stands immobile. She is fixed to the spot. She is crimson with embarrassment. And the brand new mother with her brand new baby says in her heart, thank goodness, that is not my child. What she doesn't know is as she passes this little debacle, her baby leans over the edge of his buggy, winks at the toddler, and whispers, I can't wait to try that. Same with our teens. We have such high expectations of them, we never ever did think they would turn out like those other people's teens. If we'd had an inkling of that, we'd have never given them advice on how to bring up their children. We never ever did believe we'd have to love these kids against the odds. We have such high expectations. And it's true in marriage. One of the main causes of conflict in marriage is we become so disappointed in our partner. We had expected so much more of them. It's fascinating to watch couples at the beginning of their married lives together. If somebody criticizes their partner, they immediately spring to their partner's defense. That tends to wear off after a while. And now our expectations begin to be dashed. What we used to call strong, we now call stubborn. What we used to call gentle, we now call weak. We begin to say, if only Sally were more like Susan, if only Harry were more like Tom, if only I had a husband, a wife like her husband, his wife. Someone said we married a dream and we really didn't want to wake up. But we do wake up, and sometimes we're disappointed. We may say, I've married the wrong person. We begin to let our mind wander to that ideal person who is out there somewhere. We imagine the kind of person who might make us happy. If only my partner were thinner, or fatter, or wittier, or stronger with the children. We begin to think about this person out there who is incredible at conversation, brilliant DIY, a sexual athlete. Everything we had ever dreamed of. We may even begin to imagine getting the news our partner has died. And although we are ashamed of it, we begin to let our mind roam to how quickly we would meet this new person who would fulfill all our needs. We may decide the way forward is to change our partner. Change can be a good thing, but sometimes we demand too much of it. You know, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I was very weedy, and I saw an advert in a magazine for a course called a Charles Atlas bodybuilding course. Anybody here signed up for that course? You wouldn't admit it if you had, would you? Well, I signed up for it. I saved up for months for this thing, and eventually it came in a big cardboard box. I didn't open it in front of my parents. I took it upstairs. The contents weren't quite as grand as the box seemed to suggest, but I began getting up early to work on this thing. It promised me nobody would ever kick sand in my face ever again, and that girls would constantly bother me on beaches. I so desperately wanted to be bothered. On the third day, while performing some intricate maneuver that would affect some muscle deep here within my shoulder, I twisted it. I had to wear a collar all summer. I lay on the beach, my head supported with towels, and nobody kicked sand in my face. They felt too sorry for me. No girls bothered me. You know, we smile, don't we, at the efforts of a small boy to make himself somebody he could not possibly be. But we so often do it to those we love. You know, I think it was the most poignant letter I've ever received. It was from a woman. She said, my father never told me he loved me. He never praised me. He thought praise would make me big-headed. He never hugged me. She said, I know he's a product of his generation and I have forgiven him, but my self-esteem is very low. I'm often depressed. I'm riddled with guilt. And then she wrote, I am 85 years old. I've thought so much about that woman. I've tried to imagine her as a teenager rushing home with paintings for her father, but they were never good enough. Tried to imagine her as a teenager trying to dress to please him. As a young woman taking the career that he wanted her to have, but she never could please him. She could be never good enough for this man. And now she's near to death herself. And he long since dead, but it is as if his ghost is at her side, demanding she become somebody she cannot be. Can happen so easily in a marriage. If only my partner were this, if only they were that. And sometimes not until a marriage is over, we will look back and wonder, why were those things such a big deal to me? Why was it such a big deal that he was stronger with the children when he was kind and always there for me? Why was her dress size so much more important than the woman she was? Why were those things such a big deal? Perhaps we should consider something G.K. Chesterton said. He said, the way to love anything is to realize it might be lost. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our journey together today is not a journey for perfection, but for a strong relationship. And any one of the issues we're considering together today can change our relationship forever, both for good or bad. But in my opinion, the next one is in a class of its own. Now, the first phrase I picked out from a letter was, I expected so much more of my marriage. The second phrase is, we don't talk anymore. It was a warm September afternoon. It had been a busy day in the law practice, and she was my last client. She'd refused to tell my secretary the nature of her visit, so when she sat down, I had no idea what she wanted. I said, how can I help you? She said, I think my marriage is over. How long have you been married? 17 years. Do you have any children? A boy of 7 and a girl of 10. Why is your relationship broken down so badly? He has made me an island. I'm sorry, would you repeat that? He has made me an island. He will talk to me about nothing. In the early years of our marriage, we would spend ages talking together, but something has happened to him. It seems he can't talk to me. When he gets in, I ask him about his day, and I get the same answer, the same grunt I get when I ask my son how it went at school. But it's deeper than that. We've had problems before, but we could always talk about them. And then she said this to me: have you any idea what it's like to share your life, your time, your body with somebody who will not talk with you about anything in depth? She said, eventually you die inside. She would have gone on, but just then the coffee arrived, and as I poured it, my mind went to another client who'd sat in that same chair just hours before. I knew Tom and his wife well, and I knew the man better than I knew the wife. He was a hard man, often in control, a high-flying businessman, not very emotional, which made it hard for me to understand the figure I'd seen in front of me that day. When he came in, he'd obviously been crying. He had a crumpled note in his hand. He just pulled it from the fridge door, and he handed it to me as though it had a life of its own. It said, I need time to think. Taking the kids to my mother's. I'll be away for a couple of days. I'll be in touch soon. Love, Susan. I listened as he poured his heart out to me. He couldn't understand what the problem was. He'd always provided for his wife and his family. They took frequent holidays. They had a lovely home. He said to me, where have I gone wrong? But the crumpled note wasn't the only piece of paper he brought in that day. As he had searched his home to discover where his wife had gone, he had discovered a half-written letter she had written to a friend. She had said, Tom and I were so in love when we got married. It was nothing for us in those early days to sit and talk for hours. Even when we weren't speaking, there was a sense we knew what the other was feeling. It's hard to know when we really grew apart. Tom's job became more and more demanding. I had the children to see to. It may have been I gave them too much attention and he felt excluded. But looking back, I honestly feel if I hadn't been speaking to them, I wouldn't have been talking to anybody. He comes home so tired he can hardly say hello, let alone tell me about his day or pretend to be interested in mine. I hate it. I long to speak to him. And sometimes after we had made love, I would for a moment believe he felt close to me. And as we lay there, I'd begin to share with him so much of what I'd been longing to say. But so often as I did, I would realize he was already asleep. And then a strange thing happened. I learned to live without him. Oh, I tried hard to be a wife to him, but inside I learned to live apart from him. It was as if something in my very being said, you're on your own now. For your sake and the kids, face it. Learn to live with it. Lack of communication doesn't mean not talking about anything. It means not talking about anything that really matters. There comes a point in many marriages where one of the partners either cannot or will not talk about things that the other one is dying to share their heart about. Such people can be great communicators in other settings. He in the office or factory is the life and soul of the party. She has several friends with whom she shares the most intimate details of her lives. But at home, they have lost the ability to share with those they love. All kinds of reasons have been suggested as to why we find it so hard to communicate. It's no secret that men find it hard to share their heart in depth. But watch this man at the beginning of an affair. He sat in a car talking to his secretary. He is speaking 10 to the dozen. She says to him, my husband never speaks to me like this. He says, my wife never listens. The sheer excitement of that affair is keeping that conversation going. They're simply not taking each other for granted. That day will come for them fast enough. You know, I am convinced that many marriages of 20, 30 years haven't had an hour when they've actually listened to each other. You know, when it comes to sharing our hearts, most of us need all the help we can get. Here are 4 ways that other couples have shared with me they have found helpful. Number 1, use discussion starters. Now, I have put some of these in the workbook that goes along with this film. They're just ways that get us going in conversation. Di and I have used them sometimes. Don't start with number 20. Number 20 says, if you could change anything about me, what would it be? Don't start with that. Start with number 10, I think it is, which says, if somebody left you £1,000 tomorrow, what would you spend it on? Now, you'll soon get off those silly discussion starters, but they just get you going in conversation. Secondly, plan communication. You know, I can think of an overbusy executive, the kind of man that couldn't resist the phone ringing. He lived life in a flurry of activity, and one day he realized the things he loved most, including his wife, were slipping through his fingers. He destined every Tuesday night they would meet. Every Tuesday night, sometimes a meal, sometimes nothing like as grand, cup of coffee, a walk around the park, but they planned that time for communication in. You could not get near that man on a Tuesday night. It mattered to him. Number 3, write your partner a letter. You say, this seminar is getting worse. We're mailing each other now. I know a man who told me, he said, writing my wife a letter not only saved my marriage, but made my marriage. You know, sometimes we can share in a letter what we find so hard to articulate. Here's one letter a man wrote to his wife. Darling, I am so sorry that we don't seem to be able to talk to each other anymore. I think I know why you find it so hard. I know for most of our married life it's been you pleading with me to sit down and talk. But you are so much better with words than me. And when we begin to fight, I always lose the argument. I'm sorry for the way I hurt you last Friday, but so often I feel cornered. But I do love you. Let's both try. If we don't, there's no hope. And sometimes when we set out in a letter, basic things that are on our heart, we just get communication going again. But principle number 4, I think, may be the deepest of them all. It's that what many people are craving for in a relationship is not just someone to talk to them, but someone to listen to them. You know, the greatest compliment you can pay another person when you're speaking to them is to look in their eyes when they're talking to you. Just look right into their very eyes. Diane used to say to me when the children were small, darling, kneel down, cup their heads in your hand and look in their eyes when they're speaking to you. You may have heard of the little girl who was reading to her father. She's about 5 years old. He had his head sunk in the newspaper. She said, Daddy, listen to me while I read to you. He said, I am listening. Daddy, she said, you have to listen with your eyes. Melissa Sands, who founded Mistresses Anonymous, said, many wives think the mistress has a sexual manual that keeps her man bewitched. Actually, she said, many are fantastic listeners. You know, many of us are craving somebody who will just listen. When you listen, you say to somebody, you matter to me. I'm interested in your life. I am with you. Well, if that first phrase was, I had so many more expectations, and the second one was, we don't talk anymore, the third is, we just don't have time for each other. Somebody has worked out if we drive about 20,000 miles a year, we will spend 6 months of our lives waiting for red traffic lights to change. They reckon we spend about 2 years looking for things and about 24 years asleep. Well, you work it out. You spend 24 years asleep, 2 years looking for things, and 6 months waiting for red traffic lights to change. There's not much time to do anything else. Life is pressurized today. We are people in a rush. You know, near me, there's a leisure center, one of these quite fancy affairs. It is fascinating to go in there and just people watch. Young men come with their tiny waists and their lycra, and middle-aged men come in old jogging suits they hadn't worn since they were in school with their rather larger waists. But the fascinating thing is where these people park their cars. And they do so in ever-increasing numbers in the disabled spaces just outside the front door. Selfishly, they could easily walk, they park there. Now, if you interrupted them in the gym in the middle of some aerobic nightmare and said, why can't you be fit enough just to walk 20 yards? Why do you have to pick the disabled spaces? they would say to you, I was in a rush. We are a people in a rush. The other day, the curator of a Washington zoo said, most people look at the animals for about 10 seconds. He said most tourists believe the hippopotami stay under the water for vast periods of time. Actually said the average is 90 seconds. But they don't hang around long enough to see the poor animal come up. We are a people in a rush. And many of the letters that come into us in Care for the Family talk of the pressures that overcommitment put on families. I've talked about the overbusy man, but here's a letter from a career woman who came to believe it was time pressure that caused her family to break. She says, I entered an empty house and wandered around the rooms. They were gone. They'd asked me over and over again to give them time, but I had such a busy job, so many commitments. But all I wanted as I stood in that hollow house was them back again. I wanted to hear my child say, will you play with me now? I wanted to say, yes, of course I remembered Emma's birthday. I wanted to pull from its socket the telephone I'd never been able to resist ringing and rip the famous appointments diary in 100 pieces. I wanted to tell them, you really mattered to me more than it all. What a poignant phrase. You mattered to me more than it all. We so often see clearly as we look back. Hey, what can we do about this? We can change. We can change. You know, the other day in my home, I got a piece of junk mail. I'll read it to you. It said, Dear Underachiever, I am not trying to insult you or demean you. I think, thank goodness he's not trying. I just happen to believe most people are underachievers. These unfulfilled men and women never reach potential. I believe in being a no-limit person, and I can make you one. It was 7 in the morning. I stood bleary-eyed, letter in hand, in the hallway of my home, gazing down at my slippers. I am wondering, would I like to be a no-limit person? Would I like to be able to run a full-time job, sit on endless committees, learn croquet and Italian in my spare time, and still build a strong relationship with my wife and children? Would I like to say yes every time anybody asked me to do something, still have space for my own family? Would I wish I was Superman, I could fly and juggle at the same time? You bet I do. But I can't. And the reason I can't is because time is limited. Whether I am rich or poor, clever or dull, I have exactly the same amount of time as everybody else. Time is limited. Every day comes to me full of 1,440 minutes. By the time I've woken up, remembered it's not Saturday but Monday and had a wash, only 1,000 of them are left. Every day I spend every one of them, and every choice I make as to how I'll spend them precludes another. There is no shortage of time-saving devices. Fast food, diaries that allow us to plan every minute of the day. The only thing you and I don't have any more of is time. But none of us would live like this if we thought it would always be the same. None of us would miss time with our wife, our husband, our friends, our children, if we thought life would always be this busy, so we fool ourselves. We say this is just a busy period. Life won't always be this way. That is an illusion. Generally, that slower day never comes. I've made so many mistakes in this area, but one day it dawned on me that although I was relatively successful, my own family was slipping through my fingers. I talked about that experience in a book I wrote called The 60-Minute Father. And wherever in the world that book is sold, people thank me particularly for just one line. That line tries to tell us, go for your career, go for your job, be the best that you can be in whatever you do. But give time to those you love. If you don't, you may look back with tremendous regret. And the line, it's very simple. The line is, nobody ever said on their deathbed, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. I read a fascinating book the other day by Hiram Smith. Let me share one of the illustrations in that with you. Let me just ask anybody here today, any of you have toddlers? Any of you have toddlers? Put up your hands if you've got a toddler. Okay. So how old is your toddler?
Just 3.
3, and a boy or girl?
Boy.
Boy, what's his name?
Thomas.
Okay. And what's your name?
David.
David. Okay, David, I want you to imagine this. You're in the construction industry, okay, and there's an I-bar. Do you know what an I-bar is? Well, an I-bar is like a capital I, but it's a big girder. It's 120 feet long, and it's about 2 foot wide, 2 foot deep, okay? And we put this I-bar along a road, so it's resting on the road. You're one end of this I-bar, you're 120 feet away from me, and I'm the other end. Now, if I said to you, would you walk along that I-bar towards me, David, for, say, 100 pounds? Would you do that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Just walk along the I-bar.
Yeah.
Okay, now we lift that I-bar up by a helicopter to the twin towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. Those towers are thousands of feet high, okay? They are built so they sway in the wind at the top. About 100 feet apart, and we lower the I-bar so it's 10 foot this side and 10 foot that side. And I-bars don't normally bend, but this is bending slightly. It's raining. It's not raining heavily, David, but it is raining. And it's misty. And the I-bar is swaying in the wind. And you're on that building, I'm on this building. Now, David, will you walk across that I-bar towards me for 100 pounds?
No way.
Okay, well, let's make it more interesting. 500 pounds.
No.
5,000 pounds. 50,000 pounds.
No.
I got your child by the hair. If you don't walk along this I-bar towards me, I'm going to drop your son. Will you walk towards me now?
Yeah.
David, you have just discovered what matters to you most in life. I doubt you'd have walked across the I-bar for £1 million, but in a moment you said, that child matters more to me than my life itself. Now, I don't know you personally, but if the time ever comes for you in life where other priorities, things like business and time and even making money, crush in on you, remember this night. And the things that matter to you more than all the rest put together. See, no amount of New Year resolutions, management courses, time-saving devices can change us. There comes a time in life where we must discover our real priorities. Key phrase number 4, we are always fighting over something. You know, I'm very wary of couples who tell me they never have arguments, aren't you? They remind me of that couple in their 90s who, while they were in their 90s, began divorce proceedings. They'd always given the impression they had a perfect marriage. Friends said to them, why now after all these years? They said, well, we wanted to wait until the children were dead. Listen, you and I will experience conflict in our home for many reasons. Let me give you some reasons. Number 1, we've already looked at expectations. We expected so much more of these people. You and I will know conflict because we care so much. This is our wife, our husband. These are our children. Sure, we've been heard to say, no, I'm not his mother. I think his mother went that way, but they're ours. We have conflict because we care so much. And you and I will have conflict because none of us come to relationships with a clean slate. We all carry baggage. Come with me for a moment to the brand new apartment of a newly married couple. They're just back from honeymoon. Look, the confetti is still in their hair. And there are their wedding presents in the corner of the room. 45 toasters, several kitchen racks. But what are these 2 old wooden boxes with big brass bands around them covered in dust, like 2 huge sea chests? And who brought these old things into this new home? Oh, this young couple brought them. They did not intend to bring these old things, but the old boxes would not be left behind, and they were bumped unknowingly over the threshold of their new life together. And whatever do they contain? Oh, they contain 24 years each of memories, experiences, joys, and pain. The boxes were opened on a Tuesday night at 7:15. She'd been at work all day, but she'd got him a meal. But when he came in, he said, I had lunch hour. Well, okay, if you insist, I'll have it in the other room on a tray watching the big match. The lasagna missed him because he ducked. But later he thought, what did I do? How could he know at that moment time would do its great trick? And suddenly she'd be an 8-year-old girl watching her father, who always had his meal on a tray watching the big match, who never had time for his own wife or his own children. How could he know when she was a teenage girl she vowed she would never have a marriage like that? How could he know at that moment her box would open? And we all carry baggage like that. None of us come with a clean slate. We would do well to identify it, to talk about it, to share. If we do, it will help when ghosts come visiting. And fourthly, you and I will know conflict in our home because we're all changing. We get used to these children as babies, then they're toddlers, then they're teenagers. We want them to have their own opinions so long as they're the same as ours. And we're all changing in marriage. One marriage expert said, and I think it's right, that during the course of one marriage, we'll be married to at least 3 different people. Diane told me the other day she is fervently praying for number 4. You and I are going to have conflict. In fact, in itself, it's not a bad thing. You know, the problem with many marriages is not they fight too much, they don't fight enough. There is rather what someone has called a creeping separateness. They just grow apart over the years. The important thing is how we handle conflict. In some marriages, conflict becomes an integral part of the relationship and eventually destroys it. Here are 4 classic bad moves that can lead to that situation. Bad move number 1, forget the issue, attack the person. Imagine your wife has forgotten your son's dental appointment, and you scream at her, "How come you forgot John's dental appointment?" That's not a big problem. You can have a fight over that. But when you add, "You are such a useless wife and mother," you attack her very person, and it's always wrong. Your child will get over, "How come you got a D in maths? I'm sure if you work harder, you could get up to a B." You can scar her for life with, "You are such a loser. If you don't do better, you'll never be as clever as your brother." When you attack someone's person, you almost scar their very soul. Bad move number 2, widen the issue. See, in conflict, we don't just stick to the issue. We love to widen the issue to bolster our argument. So we don't just say to our wife, "How come you forgot John's dental appointment? You are such a lousy wife and mother." We add, "That's why last year's holiday with my mother was such a disaster." Now, the fascinating thing is the person who has that said to them doesn't normally say, "Just a moment, what on earth has last year's holiday with your mother got to do with a dental appointment?" Now, actually, there are some similarities, mostly to do with pain. But they don't say that. No, they widen the argument. "Oh, you want to talk about that, do you? I will never forget the time you humiliated me at that office party. How come you got overlooked for promotion again?" See, every marriage has 5 or 6 old mortar bombs that they bring out in time of conflict. We would do well to lay them down, if only to find new ones. Bad move number 3, never lose an argument. There is nothing more destined to create terminal conflict in a marriage than one of the partners being brilliant with words. These creatures always have the final say. They have the ability to twist, forget, manipulate, quote expert authority, and generally make you wish you hadn't bothered starting this particular fight. They really believe they win arguments. What they don't see is what they leave behind, the bitterness inside. There's only one hope for such a partner. They must learn to lose arguments, to back off, to let the person who's not so articulate share what is on their heart. And if they do, they'll discover 2 things. Number 1, winning arguments is nothing like as important as it appears to be. And secondly, within 2 days, you can't even remember what the argument was about. Bad move number 4, forget the power of the tongue. We should never forget the power of the tongue. The tongue has the ability to bring people up and to drag them down. I meet people sometimes and I watch them as a man will bring his wife down in public, a woman tear into her husband in public. They say, "Oh, that's just my character, it's just my humor." No, it's not. Often it happens when people are basically very insecure in themselves, and the only way they can bring themselves up is to tear others down. The power of the tongue is awesome. Tom was always bringing Susan down in public, an old joke over her weight. And she began to retort with jokes about his intellectual ability. She was brighter than him. They were a regular sideshow at parties. And one day she wrote him this letter. Darling, I'm writing to you because I think I can best express how I feel in a letter. I am so afraid at the way we tear each other apart in public, and I'm going to stop doing it. Foolishly, I've tried to give back as good as I've got, but I know if we go on living like this, our love for each other will eventually die. From now on, when it happens, I am simply going to leave wherever we are. I know that will be embarrassing for both of us, but it's better than the slanging match we're putting on at the moment. Let's both try. Tom brought his wife down one more time. You'll never forget it. They were the friends having a meal, and he made the old joke about weight. Suddenly she stood up. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out. That night they had the biggest fight of their life, but he never, ever did it again. She said in her heart, I can't change you apparently, but I can change me. Oh, the power of that tongue. But you know, even if we learn by these methods to deal with conflict well, there are some situations where it lies a little deeper than technique. Oh, those memories. You know, it's sometimes said that time gives events a rosier hue. I believe it must be true. It must be that allows us to look back on the time when our children were very small and hardly scream. We remember the time that little Johnny spilt paint over the brand new carpet, and we laugh about it now. We forget at the time we wanted practically to climb up the wall. But here is a great mystery. If time is so clever at flushing from our minds the many horrors of the past, why do we find it so hard to forget those occasions when somebody we love has hurt us badly? Could be the memory of the affair, or the way we were let down when we so desperately needed support at that time of our life. One man said, you don't realize what a good memory you've got until you try with all your heart to forget something. Time and time again, people say to me, I wish I could forget, but I can't. And yet, if we are to build strong relationships, we have to learn to let go of the past and forgive. Sometimes forgiveness is for very deep things, for harsh words, for humiliations. When Anne told Jack about the affair, it was already over. She wasn't sure what she'd expected him to do, and in her mind she'd run over hundreds of possibilities, including his leaving. What she didn't expect was nothing. No comment, no tears, no rage, just silence. For almost 2 months, and finally she wrote him a letter. Jack, if I could rewind this last year, I would do so at any cost. I don't know what made me do what I did. I know we're going through a bad time, but nothing that justified my doing this to you. I love you, and I love our children. But if you and I are to have any chance of staying together, I need to ask you to do something I don't deserve. I need you to forgive me. I don't need you to tell me again how wrong I've been. I know that now. I just need you to forgive me. The road back for them began with that letter, and with his crying like a child for the whole day. But he did forgive. Together they decided that day to begin again, to do all they could to forget the past. It is not an easy path. It didn't mean that some mornings he still didn't wake with that old feeling in his stomach. But as an act of the will, he vowed to let go of the past. Happened 7 years ago. To this very day, he's never thrown it at her, never raised it when losing an argument over something else, and they have found love again in spite of it all. Forgiveness is not deciding to become a doormat. A man who cannot decide between his mistress and his wife and family, comes on weekends and then goes back to his mistress on a Monday, and who says like a 5-year-old, I can't decide, I want both of you, does not need forgiveness so much as he needs something that will clarify his mind. And sometimes that will be a wife saying, I love you more than you know, but I cannot go on sharing you like this. It's time for you to decide. Forgiveness is not magical. We can ask too much of it. Sometimes we expect things to be exactly as they were, but sometimes time must be in the healing process. But forgiveness is very powerful. It feels pain, but doesn't hoard it. It allows tomorrow to break free of yesterday. It is always hard, sometimes foolish, and almost godlike. There is no hope for us without it. When my little boy was 4 years old, I was on a beach and there were some people water skiing. He said, Dad, could I water ski? I said, son, you can't even swim. I said to the man, can he try? He said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put him on a wide board and the boat will tow him around the bay. They put 2 big rubber rings on Lloyd. You could just see his head and little feet underneath. The man said, sit on the board, son, and the boat pulled him out. When he was 50 yards out, he stood. My son skied all the way around the bay. And as he was coming in, he must have been about 10 yards from the beach. For no apparent reason, he fell off. When he got to the sand, I said, son, you were great. But why'd you fall off like that? Dad, he said, I wanted to do it just like you. I have thought so much about the little boy. What made him stand in the middle of that vast ocean? If you'd put a ramp in front of him and said, Lloyd, try the ramp, try it on one leg, put the rope in your teeth, he'd have said, no, I can't do that. But somewhere in the middle of that vast ocean, a little boy said to himself, you know, I think I could just begin. I think I could stand. Sometimes it's like that at moments. Our heads are just whirling with many things. We hardly know where to begin. But sometimes we have to find something small that will allow us to bring the most powerful force on the face of the earth into being, the power of change. We have to begin. Thank you so much. Thank you for your welcome. It's great to be with you here. You know, it's great to have my wife Diane and my daughter Katie here tonight. One of the joys of the tour we did of Canada, 13 cities in about 16 days, was to have my son Lloyd with me. But thank you for coming tonight. You know, in this session we're going to look together at the issue of sex and then 3 illusions that have to be dispelled if our love is to last. But I don't think we can consider sex without first thinking about the whole issue of worth. In truth, relationships, including sexual relationships, begin to break where we come to believe we don't matter anymore. Just after we got married, so about 24 years ago, there was a knock on our door near Christmas, and a man stood there. He was practically homeless. He had all his belongings in a black plastic bag. Dan said to him, why don't you come and stay with us one evening? He stayed with us Christmas night and the following night, and he never ever left us. And so Ronnie has lived with us all these years. He's been there longer than the children. Ronnie's a dustman, and so the lawyer and the dustman have lived together all those years. When he first got his job, I used to take him to work very early in the morning to make sure he got there on time. He had never had a family of his own, incidentally, spent all his life in institutions. I used to drop him off at work in the morning, say goodbye, and I'd get home at night, and he'd be sat in a chair, smiling. And I'd say, Ronnie, when I come home at night, you're always smiling. What amuses you so much? Robbie said, when you take me to work in the mornings, the other men say to me, Ron, who's that brings you to work in the fancy car? And I say, oh, that's my lawyer. See, Ronnie never did have a mum take him first day of school. Never did have somebody brush a tear away as he went for the first time into the schoolyard. Never did have a father say to him when he was 13, how'd it go at school today, son? And now he was in his 30s, but somebody was at the gate. Most of us need to know almost more than breath that we matter to somebody. This letter came to me in Care for the Family. I don't expect you to understand how I feel. I'm sure you get people writing to you that get hit or abused in some other way. Perhaps their partners are having an affair. I have experienced none of that, and in a way I feel selfish writing to you. It's just I've come to believe in our home I don't matter anymore. My teenage children treat me as though I'm some kind of unwelcome but necessary intrusion into their lives, and my partner doesn't treat me well or badly. It's just as if I don't count. If the television broke down, there'd be pandemonium, but if I broke down, it would take a month for anybody to notice. I don't feel as if I matter. There, that's it. No more or less. I just don't matter. It's so easy to take each other for granted in marriage. I think of an older man now who every day goes to his wife's grave. He spends money to buy flowers for that grave. He sits and talks to his wife, now gone, of course. And yet he shares his heart with me. And he says, Rob, you know, when she was alive, I never bought her presents apart from Christmas and birthday. I found it so hard to spend time with her in conversation in depth. But now he spends time and money and he has conversation, and I could cry with him. Because we've all been there to some extent. It is so easy to take our partner for granted. What can we do about this? Number one, we can begin to create in others a sense of worth. You know, some years ago I was taken by a guide into the Sinai desert. He showed me a plant that had learned to live without water. When the rains don't come, that plant dies in sections. First a half, and then a part of that will hang on, then a quarter, then an eighth, until just the stem is hanging on, hoping for the rains to come. And when the rains do come, it bursts into life and seeds go out hundreds of feet into the air. Some of us are like that in our marriage relationships. We are dying for someone to let us know in some small way we matter. And when it comes, it can be like rain in the desert. Bring each other affirmation. Don't bring each other down. Praise each other. Learn to give worth. You know, that second point is important. Practice the power of praise. Many of us have long since forgotten how to praise somebody. I remember counseling a couple. They'd been at each other's throats for at least 10 years. I turned to the woman and said, tell me something, one thing that you are proud of in your husband. She said, he is utterly reliable. When the chips are down, he has always been there for me. I saw the look on his face. He was utterly astonished. He had never, ever heard his wife say anything positive about him. I sensed the atmosphere change in that conversation in a moment. Practice the power of praise. And thirdly, rediscover the incredible power of touch. Touch is such a powerful medium to let somebody know, you matter to me, you are somebody. I remember Diane saying to an old woman, she was about 75, 80 years old some years ago, who had begun ballroom dancing. Di said, do you enjoy dancing? Oh, my dear, she said, I do. But the real reason I do it, it's the only time of the week when anybody touches me. I saw a letter from a 13-year-old boy. He said, my folks don't hug me anymore. They think I'm too big. But when no one was looking, I wish they still would. Hug your teenagers, won't you? Even if they stand there like a stiff board, keep hugging them. Don't give up. But make sure nobody is looking. The most embarrassing moment of my whole legal career occurred when I was 39 years old, senior partner in a large legal practice. I'm in a car. My crusty old bank manager is next to me. And I see my dear old mother shopping. I say, do you mind if we give my mother a lift? Not at all, he said. My mother had not been in the back seat of that motor car for 5 seconds. But she leant forward, tapped him on the shoulder, pointed at me, and said, don't you think he's lovely? He replied, "Very nice indeed, Mrs. Parsons. Make sure no one is looking." A woman writes to me, "I love my husband, I believe he loves me, but he never tells me so. We rarely talk together now. Although I know he's so busy I can't help myself. I resent the fact he won't spend time with me. When we go to bed, he often wants sex, but I just can't switch on. I wish I could. He feels I reject him. I suppose in a way I do. It's strange. What I really crave is for him to hold me. Just to hold me. The strange thing is, I think if he did, I'd want sex." That woman is getting to the heart of why many of us experience difficulty in the whole sexual arena. It's not just a matter of sex, but of relationship. Sometimes when we're counseling, we'll say to a couple, if you could change anything at all in your relationship, what would it be? 6 times out of 10, a man will say sex. "I wish my wife was more interested in sex." We turn to the woman, "What would you change?" "Affection. I wish she was more affectionate." How could he show that? "Oh, I'd love him to listen to me when I speak to him. I'd love him when we're out shopping not to walk 50 yards ahead of me. Love him sometimes to hold my hand when we're out. I'd love him sometimes to touch me in a non-sexual way just to let me know I matter." Let's move on to that issue of sex. Almost every marriage goes through a time where one of the partners finds difficulty in the sexual relationship. That is very common. The couple are in the counseling room. We've talked about conflict, communication. Then one of them will say, "And our sex life died years ago." Is there any hope that this couple rediscover a sex life that actually seems to have died years ago? Yes, there is. But only if they dispel 4 myths that hit couple after couple. Myth number 1, this is just us. She makes her way along the shelves in the newsagent. She's trying to find a magazine, and she glances through the front covers to find one that may interest her. And then she sees the headline, "Great Sex in Your 60s." She picks it up, she scans the article, and whispers under her breath, "I must be abnormal. I'm 35, I got a husband I love, and yet if one of the political parties voted to abolish sex tomorrow, I'd vote for them. Why can't I feel like these 60-year-olds were leaping from the tops of wardrobes dressed only in a bus pass?" One of the great difficulties to finding answers to problems we experience in our sexual relationship is we believe nobody else in the world could be experiencing this, yet the opposite is true. You're not the only woman who doesn't leap at the thought of sex every night. You're not the only man going through some difficulty in your sexual relationship. This is very common. Like so many other traumas that hit us in marriage, we come to believe this is just us, but it's not just you. And that sense of isolation can be crushing, but especially when it seems the whole world is having great sex. That is, if you believe myth number 2, that Hollywood is the real world. Sarah and Neil had been married for about 6 years. They had a daughter, Samantha, age 3. And for some reason, she was able that night to sleep in her favorite sleeping position in the whole of the world, at a little mattress at the foot of her parents' bed. She went to bed at 7 that night. They came to bed at midnight. The room was pitch black. They slid into bed. He whispered, "Darling, come closer." She said, "Don't even think about it." "No." "Darling, we've had such a romantic evening, we actually lit the candles." "No." "Darling, don't do this to me, you look fabulous tonight." "No." Then a little voice in the darkness. "Daddy, when Mummy says no, she means no." One of the prerequisites if we discover a good sexual relationship is we stop taking ourselves too seriously. Stop quitting trying to believe our sex lives are going to impress Hollywood. In that particular suburb of Los Angeles, it seems the sex is always wonderful, the beds are always made, the women look fantastic, they have an insatiable appetite for lovemaking, the men are animal-like yet tender, rough yet smooth, and never fall asleep afterwards. The real world is a little different. In the real world, there are periods, mind-numbing tiredness, and children that are pre-timed, awake at the very hint of passion. Enjoy the films, but don't compare your love life to them. You know, we get letters into Care for the Family that say things like this. I have just read that most couples enjoy sex 2.7 times a week. I have no idea what the 0.7 is either. They say, we don't have sex anything like that often. Are we abnormal? Listen, it doesn't much matter whether you have sex 2.7 times a week, 2.7 times a month, or what have you. What matters is you find a level of sexual relationship that suits you. Even then, one of the partners will probably want sex more than the other, but with gentleness and patience, you'll need to talk about that. Remember saying to a woman, your husband says you're not interested in sex. She said, no. With him, who would be? He comes home about 7 at night, he sits in front of the television, he grunts, he kicks the cat. He's got a slight cold, so he's sipping bottle after bottle of cold remedy. Looks as though he's about to die any moment. Somehow he manages to get upstairs and falls into bed. And I look at him. Think, well, I've been married to the old boy for almost 20 years. I'll lie next to him and hold his hand as he slips into eternity. So I lie next to him, grab his hand, and suddenly, hey presto, divine healing. I look at him, I say, you can't possibly want to. You almost dead a moment ago. Oh, I feel a bit perkier now, he says. And many women will actually use the word, they say it makes me feel like a prostitute. Now, it is being used, but women may need to understand that the sexual reaction in most men is so fast and can generally be more easily divorced from the whole relationship. One expert, and I think it's right, said, sexually speaking, most men are like gas stoves. They roar into life pretty fast, and frankly, they go out pretty quick. Women are more like electric stoves. They take a long time to warm up, quite a long time sometimes. And you think, is it hot? No, not yet. So you leave it for an hour or two. No, not yet. And suddenly this thing is red hot. But now you've done cooking. But she says, hold me. Talk to me. Myth 3, great sex is always spontaneous. You know, so often when it comes to bedtime, we're absolutely shattered. We're glad to be alive, let alone think about sex. A mother's got home from work, she's been a full-time job all day, she deals with 2 toddlers, a hamster on the loose, helps with the teenagers, homework, takes the cat to the vet. When she gets to bed, sex is not the highest thing on her agenda. This woman is glad to be breathing. But it's on his mind. She says, no way. And as he curls up with his back to her, in his hurt forever position. She thinks, am I abnormal? The answer's no, just sane. That's why one husband wrote to me and he said this, I know it sounds a bit clinical, but life is so hectic, we found if we didn't plan ahead, we were just too tired for sex. Special evening. He said, I'm not saying it'll work for everybody. We have come to regard those nights as special. Even then, we don't always have sex, but we make room both in time and emotionally. Of course, it can still happen spontaneously, but we're beginning to see the value of taking our sexual relationship seriously. In fact, Jim Boston, sexual therapist, said, couples say they don't have time for sex, but so often it's because they don't make time. Myth number 4, we could never rediscover our sex life. I know it's not true. I see couple after couple who do just that. In fact, after 15 years of marriage, Kevin decided to do something about their sex life other than complain. He began to go out with his wife alone rather than always with friends. He stopped carping about the few extra pounds she'd put on, started to compliment her again, began to touch her more, and most important of all, did that with no expectation of sex later that day. Their sex life changed when his wife began to believe she really mattered. For Rachel and David, it changed when she let him know he was valued even though he'd lost his job. She valued him not for what he did, but for the man he was. Sex is an important part of marriage, but don't see it as the measure of love. And we can find answers. A man aged 65 came up to me recently after one of our seminars. He said, "My wife and I have discovered a sex life we thought was gone forever." Some are helped by seeing a professional counselor, some by reading a book, but countless more by being real and remembering the sex therapist was right, who said if a man wants a wild Friday night, he better begin working on it Monday morning. Because after all, this is love making. Ladies and gentlemen, our time together is almost at an end. We've talked about knowing that we matter and sex, but what of those three illusions that have to be dispelled if love is to last? Come with me for a moment to a wedding service. I sit at the back of a church and watch this young couple. The bridegroom is the son of a friend of mine. He looks so handsome, she's so beautiful. There's a smell of fresh cut flowers. The page boy and the bridesmaids look wonderful. Nothing can spoil the completeness of this moment. Not even the thought of all those cards being read at the reception spoil my view of this wonderful day. Everything seems perfect. And yet I spend my life dealing with relationships that are broken. Love that began as this one does today, filled with hope and optimism. And as I sit and watch this young couple, I wonder that if somebody said to me, you have just 10 minutes to pass on to them some counsel that can help them, what would you say to them? And I decide that I would ask them to consider what on this perfect day seems to be impossible. I ask them to imagine that the day will come when it seems their love is at an end. It's time to leave each other. And I will tell them of the three great illusions they will have to deal with if they are to come through that arid period in their relationship. Illusion number one. Nothing could ever change for us now. It's too late. It's over. You know, sometimes people say to me, but surely some marriages are over. Well, they may be, but don't ask me to tell you which ones. Time and time again, I've seen marriages that were all but dead find life again. Sometimes couples have said, we're going to stay together for the sake of the children. That may not always be a good reason, but it's still a good reason. And I have known countless couples who have done that, and in that process found love again. Some of those have been in situations where for 20 years they've tried to change their partner, but now they decide to change themselves. They used to have a tongue that sprang quickly to criticism. Now they begin to praise. They used to be closed emotionally and always in total control. Now they begin to be vulnerable, to say, I need you. Give me your advice. Give me your wisdom. And then they discover something by surprise, that because change is dynamic, it is impossible. It does not affect the other person. Somebody writes to me, you may not remember me, but we talked about the problems in our marriage. It is only fair to let you know how things have developed since. The change that has occurred is, humanly speaking, impossible. This is not just a feeling. Even the children have commented on it. They have known that Peter loves them, but they've never known how to relate to him. Their love for their dad has grown and is visible. This is the marriage I dreamt of 20 years ago. I wanted to tell you earlier, but somehow it seems more real. It has stood the test of time. I remember having a meal with a chief executive. He said, Rob, my marriage was almost over. In fact, the decree was about to be made absolute. He said, suddenly I'm in a party, crowds of people, and suddenly the room empties, and I see my wife across the other side of the room. I didn't know she was there. And as we walked past each other, I reached out and touched her. I could see what was coming. I said, you're not going to tell me, are you, a touch saved your marriage? He said, I know it sounds crazy, but it did. See, the strange thing is, often our relationship will die because thousands of tiny hurts build up. Sometimes a tiny thing can allow us to begin again. Sometimes it can be as small as a touch. Illusion number 2. Life would be so different with another person. You know, this illusion is not so easy to spot because, of course, to some extent, it's true. Life would be different with another person. We say it would be better. Anything could be better than this. Well, perhaps it would. Perhaps it wouldn't. The affair is a good example of this. Very few people go looking for an affair. It often happens when the person we are with isn't all we want them to be, and then we meet someone who promises to fulfill our every dream. Our husband is inattentive, but he listens carefully. Our wife has become dull. She is vibrant. For the first time in years, we feel truly alive. This is the person we should have married. It's December, and the office is having its usual Christmas lunch hour drink. When David entered the pub, the noise hit him like a wall. For a time he had trouble focusing. He didn't see anybody new. And then he saw us sat in a table, somebody who only just joined the marketing department. He didn't even know her name. He walked the 10 yards to a table. Soon they were chatting. He remembers as he left the pub thinking how much easier she was to talk to than Sarah. They didn't sleep together until March. If you'd have told him when he walked the 10 yards to that table it would end like this, he'd have laughed at you. They didn't plan it. They just bumped into each other. She was having a tough time in her marriage, and she said he was so understanding. He loved Sarah, or thought he did, but Carla made him feel half his 42 years. He found himself thinking about her all the time, imagining the meetings, almost enjoying the secret thrill that nobody else in the office really knew what was going on. In June, she moved out of her home and into a flat. She told him that he hadn't broken up her marriage. It would have been gone anyway. It was over. And suddenly, he had to decide. He felt like a child. The truth was he wanted both. He wanted Sarah and the children, and he wanted her. On September 1, he decided it was better for everybody. And now he stands in the hallway of their home, suitcases in hand. His daughter stands with his wife holding her mother's hand. They both watch him in sheer unbelief, as if a drama is being enacted. He says to them, "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't want it to be like this." And he leaves. We wonder what is ahead for him. I don't know. But I can tell you what is very, very common. He and the new woman in his life will build a love nest. And into this haven will come no crying children, no leaking taps that demand to be mended, or bodies to be ushered to piano class. The sex will be incredible, the conversation captivating, and when he wakes and sees her sleeping there, he'll wonder if he really ever did love Sarah. And that will last for 2 years. And then, without warning, a principle will come into force that will rock him to his heels. It was coined by Dr. James Dobson, who said this: "The other man's grass may be greener, but it still needs mowing." And suddenly the ordinary will invade their lives. Who would have thought the tap would have leaked here as it did in the bathroom at home? Who could have predicted a night when one of them would say, "No, not tonight, and did you remember to put the rubbish out?" And who could have dreamt that he will begin to imagine he is back in the pub and he is walking the 10 yards, but they lead him to a different table. And in his dream, he is telling child a bedtime story and bandaging a broken knee. But he knows nothing of that now as he stands in the hallway of his home with his brand new cases on his way to his brand new relationship. And I have heard his story scores of times. I remember speaking to a man who just left his wife. He said, "You know, the sex with my wife wasn't so good. The sex with this woman is fantastic." It's like talking to a teenager. I said, "There's never been an affair in the world where the sex wasn't fantastic, but you have a baby son, 6 months old. You are his father. He didn't ask you to bring him into the world. You were meant to see him through the toddler years and the teen years. You were meant to teach him to play football and fly a kite and pass on values to him. You were meant to be there for him. You are his father. And you tell me the sex is fantastic? Not very in to talk like that these days. We're only meant to talk about what makes us feel good and our rights. But none of us can find a love that can last if only we are thinking about what is best for us. I see too much pain on a daily basis to believe these are easy issues. They are not easy. I understand that. The affair could happen to any one of us, including me tomorrow. And you know, when we're in the middle of a trauma in our relationships, when all we want to do is to be gone and start a new life, it's easy to say, it will be best for the children if I go. If I'm happy, they'll be happy. But so often, that is so very wrong. And afterwards, it's hard to understand why they should be so badly affected. Now there's no fighting. Now there's no shouting. They don't see mum with her head in her hands or dad crying or ranting around the house. Life in so many ways is easier, and yet they are devastated. Kids are great survivors, but some of them will never recover. I suppose that shouldn't be all that surprising. See, although the partners have stopped loving each other, these children still love both parents. And they want both parents. The vast majority of parents try with all their hearts to minimize the effect of family breakup on children. But you cannot lose somebody you love, somebody you thought was going to be around with you until you were grown, without knowing some trauma. Can I say a word to someone in that situation now? You believe your marriage is over. In fact, you've been seeing somebody else for a while now, and soon you will tell your partner, and that will begin a process that will lead to your leaving your home and your family. Were we to meet, you would tell me how rough the past years have been and how you couldn't have done more. Well, perhaps that is true. But do this one more thing. Tonight, go into your children's bedrooms and stand and watch them as they are asleep. I don't mind whether they're toddlers or teens. Stand and watch them as they are asleep. And think back over the years how they have needed you, and try to imagine how they will need you in the future. And I'm not saying that simple act will change your mind, although I hope with all my heart it will. But I'll tell you this, people will write to me and say that asking you to do it was too emotional and too naive. But you won't be one of them. One of the biggest box office successes of recent times has been the film Fatal Attraction. Michael Douglas has an affair with a woman on a one-night stand while the wife he loves is out of town. One film critic said when he accepts an invitation for a drink after work, it's as if he accepts an invitation for descent into hell itself. He unleashes unbelievable trauma on his wife, his family, and the woman he sleeps with. And the scary part is where we sense he's lost control. Not sexual control, where circumstances have just run away from him, where the price he's been asked to pay is out of all proportion, he thinks, to what's happened. In Indian culture, there's a phrase, riding the tiger. The idea is of a man on the back of a man-eating tiger. If he gets off, the tiger will eat him. If he gets to the end, it will end in disaster. So often, that's the affair. The affair whispers in our ear, trust me, it will be different with me. It often promises so much and delivers so very little. Hey, perhaps George Bernard Shaw was right. He said there are two great tragedies in life. One is not to get the desire of your heart. The other is to get it. Illusion 3 is that real love is just a feeling. It's my firm belief every marriage goes to a time when one of the partners does not feel in love, where everything screams out, let go, it's over. But if we let go the first time that happens, we will never, ever find a love that lasts. It is impossible for love to be sustained by feelings alone. We live in a society where we're told, you deserve the very best. Can we always have that in marriage? So long as we have the best, someone who is attractive, witty, someone who goes on meeting all our needs, no. If we are to find real love, we're going to have to learn to love a little differently. We must love at times, not because of, but in spite of. So come back with me for a moment to that wedding. As I sit and listen to these vows, I understand that they contain a principle that today we have all but lost. In short, they dare to invade this perfect day with warnings of darker times. She says, I will love you if we are healthy and if we are sick. We'll be together if we are rich and if we are poor. The vows whisper to them, enjoy this day. But if love is to last, you must come through more difficult times. Will those vows ever be called in? As surely as night follows day, they will. That couple may have a lifetime together when they will be not just lovers but friends, but there will be times during which they'll have to fight to keep their love alive. Some of those times will be short and quickly forgotten. Others will be dark and very long. And by that time, it may not be just the two of them, but tiny children will be watching this drama being enacted. Some of you watching this film are in that very situation now. As you will know, this film is based on the book, The 60-Minute Marriage. Let me tell you, as I close, why I wrote that book. I was in a zoo. It was 2 p.m. I'd been there since 9. I was tired of trying to wake up a particularly nasty-looking snake or tempt the chimpanzees out of their backstage dwellings. I turned to watching humans. And I was watching a surefire nomination for the Perfect Father Award. He lifted his young girl to look at the elephants. Then he bent down to explain exactly why monkeys have red bottoms. I wish I'd been close enough to hear. He didn't only feed her mind, he fed her body crisps and popcorn and a lolly in the shape of a bear. Finally, even he got tired and left her rather hopefully throwing peanuts at sparrows. He sat down on a bench next to me. By now, he was my hero, and I told him so. I think I expected a shrug of the shoulders and any dad would do it. What I got was a conversation that lasted an hour. His marriage had broken up some months previously. This was his Saturday with Emily. He pulled from his pocket an old photograph. There was a woman with a brand new baby in a hospital bed. He sat with his hand on his wife's shoulder. Together they looked out at me. If I had to find a phrase to caption that faded Polaroid, it would be, they had hope. They had dreams for this child. Her bedroom was ready a full 4 weeks before she was born. This was their child. He told me of the day she first spoke. Told me of the time he saw her first walk towards him. He told me of the day that he and his wife had lost her in a crowded department store filled with Christmas shoppers. It would have been a hard or foolish man who walked away from him that day, but it filled me with sadness. I wonder whether anybody could have written anything or said anything that could have helped that little family. And now as we come to the end of this seminar, Emily is still there in my mind, foot swinging over the edge of the bench, still hopefully throwing peanuts to sparrows. She represents the children who have no say in their parents' affairs, who in that sense are too young to have a voice. Almost all we have considered together today is relevant whether or not you have children, but I confess as I spoke to you, she was so often at the back of my mind. In this seminar, I wanted to say something to help the young couple in their new relationship, even before they were married. I wanted to strengthen the hands of those who had great marriages and help them make it stronger. I wanted to say something to those going through traumatic, difficult times. But so often, it was the child Emily that filled my sight. She seemed to represent future generations of children, and I thought of her rights, her needs, and her future. I wanted to speak for her. It was for Emily's sake. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for coming. Hope with all my heart some of it may be a real help to you in your family.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, you may be interested in Rob Parsons' bestseller The 60-Minute Marriage, available on book and audio cassette, published by Hodder and Stoughton. Linda Lee Potter said of The 60-Minute Marriage, it's wise and witty, full of down-to-earth advice that works. There's also another video in this series, The 60-Minute Parent. In this film, Rob explores 10 keys for effective parenting. It will encourage and give hope to every parent. All these resources are available from local bookshops or direct from Care for the Family, P.O. Box 488, Cardiff, CF1 1RE. Telephone number 01222 464 003.